My name is Rebecca, and I am 34 years old. Last month, my 16-year-old nephew destroyed my reputation at our annual family reunion with one drunken confession that shattered everything I believed about unconditional love and blood loyalty. What he revealed that night exposed a web of lies, manipulation, and betrayal that had been carefully constructed around me for over 2 decades. The aftermath would force me to question every relationship I had ever valued, every sacrifice I had ever made, and ultimately lead me to discover that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you are born into. Before we dive into this wild family drama that completely turned my world upside down, I would love to know where you are watching from. Drop your location in the comments below and smash that like button if you have ever felt like the family outsider. Do not forget to hit subscribe because this story has more twists than a soap opera, and you definitely want to see how justice finally catches up with the people who tried to destroy me. Trust me, the revenge is absolutely worth the wait. The Miller family reunion happens every July at my parents' lakeside cabin in upstate New York. For 20 years, I had been the reliable daughter, the dependable sister, the generous aunt who always showed up with elaborate gifts and a smile plastered across my face. I worked 60-hour weeks as a marketing director at a pharmaceutical company, pouring my heart and soul into climbing the corporate ladder while my personal life remained a carefully orchestrated performance for my family's approval. My sister Caroline had always been the golden child. 3 years younger than me, she possessed an effortless charm that made everyone gravitate toward her like moths to a flame. She married her high school sweetheart at 22, produced 2 beautiful children, and settled into the picture-perfect suburban life that my parents constantly held up as the gold standard. Meanwhile, I remained single, childless, and apparently tragic in their eyes, despite my successful career and financial independence. Every family gathering followed the same predictable script. Caroline would arrive fashionably late with her husband Marcus and their 2 children, 16-year-old Tyler and 14-year-old Emma. The adults would immediately swarm around them, eager to hear updates about Tyler's baseball achievements and Emma's piano recitals. I would hover on the periphery, offering to help with luggage, bringing drinks and showering the children with expensive gifts that I hoped would earn me their genuine affection. This particular reunion started no differently. I had driven up from Manhattan on Friday afternoon, arriving early to help my mother prepare the traditional barbecue feast. Caroline's family rolled in Saturday morning, and I immediately noticed Tyler's sullen demeanor. He had grown several inches since Christmas, his voice had deepened considerably, and he carried himself with the swagger of a teenager who believed the world owed him everything. The first red flag appeared during Saturday dinner when Tyler made a snide comment about my latest gift to Emma, a professional art set that cost $300. He rolled his eyes dramatically and muttered something about me trying too hard. Caroline laughed it off, claiming teenagers were naturally ungrateful, but I caught a strange look that passed between her and Marcus. It was a look of shared understanding, almost like they were communicating in a secret language that excluded everyone else. Saturday night, the adults gathered on the deck while the teenagers claimed the basement recreation room. My father had broken out his premium whiskey collection, and the conversation flowed as freely as the alcohol. Around 11 o'clock, Tyler stumbled up from the basement, his face flushed and his movements unsteady. Marcus immediately jumped up to intercept his son, but Tyler waved him off with surprising aggression. What happened next would replay in my mind for weeks afterward. Tyler looked directly at me, his eyes glassy with alcohol and something that looked disturbingly like contempt, and said the words that would change everything. His voice carried across the deck with perfect clarity, ensuring that every family member heard every devastating syllable. "You all want to know the truth about Aunt Rebecca," he slurred, pointing an unsteady finger in my direction. "She is just the sad aunt who buys love because nobody actually wants to be around her. Mom and Dad have been laughing about it for years. They call her the ATM behind her back because she is so desperate for attention that she will pay for anything just to feel included." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt my face burn with humiliation as every pair of eyes turned toward me, some filled with pity, others with uncomfortable recognition of an uncomfortable truth. My mother gasped audibly, my father cleared his throat awkwardly, and Caroline sat frozen in her chair like a deer caught in headlights. But Tyler was not finished with his alcohol-fueled truth-telling session. He swayed slightly, gripping the deck railing for support, and continued his devastating monologue. Mom says Rebecca is pathetic because she works all the time and has no real life, so she tries to buy her way into ours. Dad says she is like a walking credit card with emotions. They have this whole joke about how to get the most expensive gifts out of her without having to actually spend time with her. Marcus finally managed to grab Tyler's arm, attempting to drag him back inside, but the damage was already done. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke, poisoning every relationship and every memory I held dear. Caroline's face had gone completely white, and she was staring at her son with a mixture of horror and panic that confirmed everything he had just revealed. My parents looked mortified, not by Tyler's words, but by the fact that their carefully maintained family dynamic had been exposed so brutally. My aunts and uncles shifted uncomfortably, suddenly finding their drinks fascinating, while my cousins exchanged meaningful glances that suggested this revelation was not entirely shocking to anyone except me. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me, and excused myself to the bathroom. Behind the locked door, I stared at my reflection in the mirror and finally saw myself clearly for the first time. The successful career woman, the generous sister, the loving aunt, all of it was just an elaborate performance that everyone else had been tolerating rather than appreciating. When I returned to the deck 10 minutes later, the conversation had shifted to safer topics, but the atmosphere remained thick with tension. Caroline approached me later that evening, her apology flowing like rehearsed lines from a play she had performed many times before. She claimed Tyler was drunk, that he did not mean what he said, that teenagers often exaggerated stories they overheard from adult conversations. But her eyes told a different story. They held the guilty knowledge of someone who had been caught red-handed, someone who was scrambling to minimize the damage rather than deny the truth. As I listened to her hollow reassurances, I realized that my entire relationship with my family had been built on a foundation of lies, manipulation, and conditional love that disappeared the moment my checkbook was no longer needed. That night, lying in the guest room bed where I had slept during countless family visits over the years, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of my life forever. I was done being the family ATM, done performing for people who saw me as nothing more than a convenient source of funding for their lifestyle choices, and done pretending that blood relationships automatically deserved unconditional loyalty and respect. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that only comes after a storm has passed through and swept away all the debris. I woke up before dawn, packed my belongings methodically, and loaded my car while the rest of the family still slept off their hangovers and their shame. The drive back to Manhattan gave me 4 hours of uninterrupted thinking time, and by the time I pulled into my apartment garage, I had developed the foundation of what would become my carefully orchestrated exit strategy. The first step involved conducting a thorough audit of my financial generosity over the past 5 years. I spent the entire following week meticulously reviewing bank statements, credit card bills, and gift receipts, documenting every dollar I had spent on my family members. The numbers were staggering and deeply embarrassing. Between birthday gifts, Christmas presents, graduation money, emergency loans that were never repaid, vacation contributions, and countless random acts of generosity, I had spent over $47,000 on people who apparently viewed me as nothing more than a convenient funding source. Caroline had received the largest portion of my financial support, including a $5,000 contribution toward Tyler's baseball camp fees, $3,000 for Emma's piano lessons and recital costumes, and countless smaller amounts for school supplies, birthday parties, and family outings. Marcus had never once offered to repay any of these contributions, and Caroline had accepted them with the entitled attitude of someone who believed she deserved financial support simply for existing. My parents had benefited significantly as well. though their manipulation had been far more subtle. They had a talent for mentioning financial struggles in casual conversation, knowing that I would immediately offer solutions. The new roof on their cabin, the updated kitchen appliances, the annual maintenance on their aging vehicles, all of it had been funded by my guilt-driven generosity and desperate need for their approval. Armed with this devastating documentation, I began implementing what I privately called Operation Boundaries. The strategy was elegant in its simplicity. I would not announce any dramatic changes or engage in emotional confrontations that would give my family opportunities to manipulate me back into my previous role. Instead, I would simply stop participating in the financial aspects of our relationships and observe how quickly their affection disappeared when the money dried up. The first test came within 2 weeks when Emma's birthday approached. Traditionally, I would have spent hours researching the perfect gift, ultimately settling on something expensive and thoughtful that would earn me praise from Caroline and grateful hugs from Emma. This year, I sent a simple card with a heartfelt handwritten message and no monetary component whatsoever. Caroline's response arrived via text message within 3 hours, expressing confusion about whether I had forgotten to include Emma's gift or if it was being delivered separately. Her follow-up messages became increasingly desperate as the day progressed, finally culminating in a phone call where she directly asked if I was having financial difficulties that prevented me from buying Emma's usual elaborate present. I responded with calm professionalism that I was reevaluating my gift-giving practices and focusing more on meaningful gestures rather than expensive items. Caroline's silence spoke volumes about her true priorities and confirmed everything Tyler had revealed during his drunken confession. The second phase of Operation Boundaries involved strategic distance from family communications. I stopped responding to group text messages about family gatherings, casual invitations to dinner, and the constant stream of photos and updates that Caroline shared seeking my enthusiastic reactions. My absence from these digital conversations created a noticeable void that my family initially tried to fill with increasingly direct attempts to draw me back into my previous role. My mother called repeatedly, claiming concern about my sudden withdrawal from family activities. During our conversations, she consistently steered the discussion toward upcoming events that would traditionally require my financial participation. Caroline's birthday was approaching, my father needed new golf clubs, and the annual family vacation to the shore would require everyone to contribute toward the rental house deposit. I listened politely to these transparent attempts at manipulation and responded with non-committal phrases about checking my budget and getting back to them later. Each conversation revealed more about how my family viewed my primary value proposition, and each revelation strengthened my resolve to maintain my new boundaries. The most telling response came from Tyler himself, who sent me a friend request on social media accompanied by a message that attempted to apologize for his reunion outburst. His apology focused entirely on the embarrassment he had caused rather than the truth he had revealed, and his friend request was clearly motivated by his upcoming birthday and the expensive gaming system he had been dropping hints about for months. I declined his friend request without explanation and did not respond to his message, marking the first time in his 16 years that one of his attempts to manipulate me had failed to achieve its intended result. His subsequent messages became increasingly desperate, eventually escalating to claims that he was being punished unfairly for telling the truth while drunk. Meanwhile, I invested the emotional energy I had previously spent managing family relationships into expanding my professional network and developing genuine friendships with colleagues who valued my personality rather than my bank account. I joined a professional women's networking group, started attending industry conferences that I had previously skipped to accommodate family obligations, and began building relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. The transformation was remarkable. Without the constant drain of family drama and obligation, I discovered aspects of my personality that had been suppressed for years. I was naturally funny when I was not walking on eggshells around people who judged my every gesture. I was intellectually curious when I was not spending all my mental energy analyzing family dynamics and political undercurrents. I was genuinely generous when I was choosing to help people who appreciated my contributions rather than expecting them as automatic entitlements. 3 months after the reunion, I received a group text message announcing that Caroline was pregnant with her third child. The message was accompanied by a link to an online baby registry filled with expensive items and a suggestion that family members coordinate their contributions to avoid duplicate purchases. For the first time in my adult life, I did not immediately click the link to select an expensive gift that would demonstrate my excitement about becoming an aunt again. Instead, I congratulated Caroline publicly in the group chat and privately marveled at how quickly she had managed to create another opportunity for family members to prove their love through financial contributions. The lack of a gift selection from my usual prominent position on her registry did not go unnoticed, and within days I received the phone call that would reveal just how deep the manipulation and betrayal actually ran. Caroline's phone call came on a Thursday evening while I was enjoying a peaceful dinner at my kitchen counter, reading a novel that I had purchased for myself instead of buying gifts for people who did not appreciate them. Her voice carried that particular tone of forced casualness that I had learned to recognize as a warning sign of incoming manipulation. The conversation started with superficial small talk about work and weather, but Caroline quickly maneuvered toward her real agenda. She was concerned about my apparent financial struggles, she claimed, and wanted to offer her support during what she assumed must be a difficult time in my life. Her concern was so obviously manufactured that I almost laughed out loud at the transparent attempt to extract information about my budget and spending capacity. When I assured her that my finances were perfectly stable, her tone shifted noticeably. She became more direct, expressing confusion about my recent behavior and suggesting that I might be going through some kind of emotional crisis that was affecting my judgment. The conversation felt like being analyzed by an amateur psychologist who was desperately trying to diagnose a problem that would explain why her favorite funding source had suddenly dried up. But the most revealing moment came when Caroline mentioned that my parents were worried about my withdrawal from family activities. According to her, they had discussed my recent behavior extensively and concluded that I was probably depressed about my single status and channeling my disappointment into punishing the family members who had achieved the traditional milestones that continued to elude me. The psychological manipulation was so blatant and insulting that I felt a surge of anger unlike anything I had experienced in years. Here was my sister, the person who had supposedly loved and supported me throughout our lives, attempting to gaslight me into believing that my newfound self-respect was actually a symptom of mental illness that required their intervention and correction. I ended the call politely but firmly, claiming that I had another commitment that required my immediate attention. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen and felt something fundamental shift inside my chest. The last vestiges of guilt and obligation that had been holding me back from fully embracing my independence disappeared completely, replaced by a cold determination to discover exactly how extensive their betrayal had been. That weekend, I drove to my parents' house unannounced for the first time in my adult life. I had always called ahead, always scheduled visits around their convenience, always brought gifts and offered to help with household projects. This time, I arrived empty-handed with the specific intention of observing their genuine reaction to my presence when it was not accompanied by financial benefits or advance notice that would allow them to prepare their performance. My mother's initial response confirmed everything I needed to know about our relationship dynamic. She seemed genuinely surprised to see me, almost confused by my unexpected appearance, and immediately asked if something was wrong that had prompted my unscheduled visit. There was no excitement, no pleasure at seeing her daughter, just concern about what problem I might represent that would require her to adjust her carefully planned weekend schedule. During the awkward conversation that followed, I learned more about my family's true feelings than I had discovered in the previous 34 years combined. My father mentioned casually that Caroline had called them after our phone conversation, expressing concern about my apparent personality changes and suggesting that they might need to stage some kind of intervention before my behavior became more problematic. The word intervention hung in the air between us like a declaration of war. They were actually planning to gather the family together to address my failure to continue funding their lifestyle expectations. The audacity was breathtaking, but it also provided me with valuable intelligence about how they viewed our relationships and what they considered appropriate responses to my newfound boundaries. I excused myself to use the bathroom and took the opportunity to walk through the house that I had helped renovate and maintain over the years. Every improvement told a story of my financial contributions and emotional labor. The kitchen cabinets I had helped refinish during my vacation days, the deck furniture I had purchased after my father mentioned that their old set was becoming uncomfortable. The framed family photos displaying all the expensive vacations and celebrations that I had helped fund. Walking through those familiar rooms, I felt like an archaeologist examining the remains of a civilization that had never actually existed. All those warm family memories were revealed as elaborate performances designed to maintain my financial contributions and emotional investment in relationships that were fundamentally one-sided. But the most devastating discovery was still waiting for me. As I prepared to leave, my mother mentioned that Caroline and Marcus were struggling financially since Marcus had been passed over for a promotion at work. She suggested that they might need some temporary assistance to cover their mortgage payments until his situation improved, and she wondered if I might consider helping them through this difficult period. The request was presented as a natural extension of my role within the family, an opportunity to demonstrate my love and support for Caroline during a challenging time. But I recognized it for what it actually was, a test to determine whether my recent behavior represented a temporary adjustment or a permanent change in our relationship dynamic. I told my mother that I would consider her request and get back to her after reviewing my budget and upcoming expenses. Her visible disappointment at my failure to immediately agree to help Caroline confirmed that my financial contributions were not just expected but considered automatic entitlements that required no discussion or negotiation. The drive back to Manhattan provided me with time to process everything I had learned and develop the next phase of my strategy. I realized that my family's manipulation was far more sophisticated than I had originally understood. They had created an entire narrative about my personality, my motivations, and my place within the family structure that served their financial interests while making me complicit in my own exploitation. That evening, I called my college roommate Jessica, who had relocated to Seattle after graduation and maintained minimal contact with her own dysfunctional family. Jessica had always been brutally honest about family relationships, and I trusted her to provide objective perspective on my situation without sugarcoating the harsh realities that I needed to face. Our 3-hour phone conversation was like therapy session and strategy meeting combined. Jessica listened to my entire story without interruption, asking clarifying questions about specific incidents and relationship patterns that I had previously accepted as normal family dynamics. Her outside perspective revealed manipulation tactics that I had been blind to because they had been my baseline experience for so many years. Most importantly, Jessica helped me understand that my family's reaction to my boundary setting was actually confirmation that those boundaries were necessary and appropriate. Healthy family relationships do not require constant financial contributions to maintain emotional connections, and genuine love does not disappear when gift-giving patterns change. By the end of our conversation, I had developed a clear plan for the next phase of my relationship with my family. I would continue maintaining my boundaries while gathering more information about their true attitudes and expectations. I would document their attempts to manipulate me back into my previous role, and I would use that documentation to make informed decisions about what kind of relationships, if any, I wanted to maintain with people who had spent decades deceiving me about their motivations and feelings. The stage was set for what would become the most challenging and ultimately liberating period of my adult life. I had allies now, people who supported my right to set boundaries and expectations based on genuine respect rather than financial dependency. The little girl who had spent 34 years desperately trying to buy love and acceptance was finally ready to discover what authentic relationships could look like. But first, I needed to find out exactly how deep the betrayal went and who else in my family had been participating in the elaborate performance that had defined my entire adult life. The opportunity for my calculated takedown arrived sooner than I had anticipated, delivered through a series of increasingly desperate phone calls and text messages from various family members over the next 2 weeks. Caroline's financial crisis had apparently reached critical levels, and my parents had mobilized the entire extended family network to pressure me into providing the emergency funding that everyone assumed I would eventually contribute. My Aunt Patricia called first, explaining that she had heard about Caroline's mortgage difficulties and suggesting that the family pool resources to help her through this challenging period. The conversation revealed that my parents had been sharing private information about Caroline's finances with extended family members, creating a coordinated pressure campaign designed to make me feel obligated to contribute the largest portion of any rescue fund. My cousin David followed up with a more direct approach, calling to inform me that he and several other family members were planning to contribute small amounts toward Caroline's mortgage payment, but they needed someone to cover the majority of the $4,000 shortfall. His assumption that I would automatically fill this role demonstrated how thoroughly my family had internalized the belief that my primary function was financial support for their various crises and lifestyle choices. But the most revealing conversation came from my father, who called with what he presented as insider information about Caroline's situation. According to him, Marcus had not just been passed over for a promotion. He had actually been demoted due to performance issues and attitude problems that made his future employment uncertain. Caroline was considering returning to work after 14 years as a stay-at-home mother, but her outdated skills and employment gap made her job prospects limited and potentially low-paying. My father's tone during this conversation was entirely different from his usual casual demeanor. He spoke with the urgency of someone who was genuinely worried about financial consequences, and his desperation suggested that Caroline's mortgage problems might affect him and my mother more directly than they had initially revealed. When I asked specific questions about how Caroline's financial difficulties could impact my parents, my father's careful explanations exposed a much larger web of financial entanglement than I had previously understood. Apparently, my parents had co-signed Caroline's mortgage refinancing several years earlier, making them legally responsible for the debt if Caroline and Marcus defaulted on their payments. Additionally, Caroline had been borrowing money from my parents on a regular basis, using their house as collateral for loans that she had no realistic plan for repaying. The financial manipulation was even more extensive than Tyler's drunken confession had suggested. My family had created an elaborate system of interconnected financial dependencies that made my contributions essential for maintaining their entire lifestyle structure. My generous gifts and emergency funding had not been supplementing their budgets. They had been subsidizing a standard of living that none of them could actually afford independently. Armed with this information, I developed what would become known in my mind as the nuclear option. Instead of continuing to participate in their manipulation games or gradually withdrawing my support, I decided to expose their financial web publicly and permanently sever my role as the family funding source. I began by calling Caroline directly and requesting a detailed explanation of her current financial situation, including her outstanding debts, monthly expenses, and realistic income projections. My tone was professional rather than emotional, presenting myself as someone who was considering a significant financial investment that required comprehensive due diligence before any commitment could be made. Caroline's response was illuminating in ways she probably never intended. She provided precise figures for her monthly expenses that revealed a lifestyle completely disconnected from Marcus's actual earning capacity. Their mortgage payment, car loans, credit card minimums, and routine household expenses totaled nearly $6,000 per month, while Marcus's reduced salary after his demotion was approximately $4,200 monthly. The mathematics were inescapable. Caroline and Marcus had been operating with a monthly deficit of almost $2,000 for an extended period, covering the shortfall through a combination of credit card debt, loans from my parents, and my regular contributions for gifts and emergencies that were actually essential budget items disguised as occasional needs. When I asked Caroline how long she had been aware that their expenses exceeded their income, her stammering response confirmed that this financial crisis was not a recent development caused by Marcus's workplace difficulties. They had been living beyond their means for years, using my generosity and my parents' financial resources to maintain an unsustainable lifestyle that created the appearance of middle-class stability while accumulating massive debt obligations. The final piece of information I needed came from Tyler himself, who sent me a desperate text message explaining that his parents were fighting constantly about money and threatening to take away his car and cancel his college fund if they could not resolve their financial problems immediately. His message included specific details about arguments he had overheard, including Caroline's plan to move back in with my parents if they lost their house and Marcus's suggestion that they declare bankruptcy to eliminate their credit card debts. Tyler's information revealed that my family's financial crisis was far more severe than anyone had admitted, and their expectations of my financial rescue were based on desperate necessity rather than temporary assistance. They needed me to cover not just Caroline's current mortgage shortfall, but an ongoing monthly deficit that would continue indefinitely unless they made dramatic lifestyle changes that none of them seemed willing to consider. With complete documentation of their financial manipulation and unrealistic expectations, I crafted a response that would permanently end my role as the family ATM while exposing the truth about our relationships to everyone involved. I composed a detailed email addressed to my parents, Caroline, Marcus, and several extended family members who had participated in the pressure campaign. The email began with a comprehensive summary of my financial contributions to the family over the past 5 years, including specific dollar amounts and detailed descriptions of how these contributions had been solicited and justified. I provided documentation showing that my gifts and emergency assistance had actually been subsidizing Caroline's lifestyle choices and enabling financial irresponsibility that had created the current crisis. I explained that Tyler's reunion confession had opened my eyes to how my family actually viewed my role and contributions, and that subsequent conversations had confirmed that my value was measured primarily in financial terms rather than personal relationships. I detailed the manipulation tactics that had been used to maintain my financial involvement, including guilt trips, manufactured emergencies, and coordinated family pressure campaigns. The email concluded with my permanent withdrawal from any future financial assistance to family members, effective immediately. I explained that I would continue to participate in family relationships that were based on genuine affection and mutual respect, but I would no longer subsidize lifestyles that my family members could not afford independently or contribute to emergency funds that enabled continued financial irresponsibility. Most importantly, I copied my Aunt Patricia, Cousin David, and several other extended family members who had been recruited into the pressure campaign, ensuring that everyone who had participated in attempting to manipulate me would understand exactly why their efforts had failed and what they had revealed about their own priorities and motivations. After sending the email, I turned off my phone and spent the weekend at a spa resort, treating myself to the kind of expensive self-care that I had previously reserved for family gift-giving occasions. For the first time in my adult life, I was investing in my own happiness rather than trying to purchase approval from people who would never truly appreciate my contributions. Monday morning brought a digital avalanche of responses that confirmed everything I had suspected about my family's priorities and revealed even more about their character than I had anticipated. My phone displayed 47 missed calls, 32 text messages, and 14 voicemails, creating a symphony of panic, anger, and desperate manipulation that would have been almost comical if it had not been so devastatingly predictable. Caroline's initial response came through a series of increasingly frantic text messages that progressed from shocked disbelief to fury to bargaining attempts within the span of 2 hours. Her first message expressed confusion about my sudden hostility and suggested that I was misinterpreting innocent family dynamics as something more sinister. Her subsequent messages revealed the true depth of her entitlement, including accusations that I was being selfish and vindictive by withdrawing support during her family's time of greatest need. But her final message in the initial barrage exposed the manipulation tactics that had been driving our relationship for years. Caroline wrote that she had always tried to include me in family activities despite my obvious social awkwardness and desperate need for attention, and that my financial contributions were the only way I had been able to maintain relationships with people who otherwise would have had little reason to spend time with someone as pathetic and needy as I had always been. The cruelty was breathtaking, but it also provided me with perfect documentation of her true feelings and motivations. Caroline had essentially confirmed everything Tyler had revealed during his drunken confession, while adding layers of personal attack that demonstrated the contempt she had been hiding behind years of manufactured sisterly affection. My parents' response was more sophisticated, but equally revealing. My father called repeatedly, leaving voicemails that attempted to position himself as a mediator who could help resolve what he characterized as a misunderstanding between family members who obviously loved each other but had allowed emotions to cloud their judgment. His messages carefully avoided acknowledging any of the specific financial documentation I had provided, instead focusing on the importance of family unity and forgiveness during difficult times. My mother took a different approach, sending a long email that attempted to reframe my entire analysis of our family relationships. According to her version of events, my financial contributions had always been voluntary expressions of love that no one had ever demanded or expected. She claimed that Caroline had never asked for money directly, and that my parents had always been grateful for my help while being careful never to make me feel obligated to provide assistance that I could not afford. The revisionist history was so blatant and insulting that I actually printed her email and highlighted the contradictions with different colored pens, creating a visual representation of how thoroughly she was attempting to gaslight me about my own experiences and memories. But the most telling responses came from the extended family members who had been copied on my original email. My Aunt Patricia called to express her disappointment in my decision to air private family matters in such a public forum, completely ignoring the fact that she had been actively participating in manipulating me to provide financial assistance for Caroline's crisis. Her concern was not about the manipulation or financial exploitation that I had documented, but about my failure to handle the situation with the discretion that would have protected the family's reputation. My cousin David sent a brief email expressing his confusion about my reaction to what he characterized as normal family support requests, suggesting that I had misinterpreted routine family interactions as manipulation attempts. His response revealed that the entire extended family had been aware of my role as the primary funding source for Caroline's lifestyle, and they had all considered this arrangement normal and appropriate rather than exploitative. The most devastating revelation came from Tyler, who sent me a direct message through social media that included screenshots of a family group chat that I had never known existed. The screenshots showed months of conversations between Caroline, my parents, and several extended family members discussing strategies for maintaining my financial contributions while managing what they described as my increasing emotional neediness and social awkwardness. The messages revealed that my family had been actively discussing my personal life, my career decisions, and my relationship status in ways that were both deeply invasive and consistently negative. They had developed elaborate theories about my psychological motivations, created strategies for managing my reactions to various family situations, and coordinated their responses to my gift-giving and financial assistance in ways that maximized my contributions while minimizing their own obligations to provide genuine emotional support. Most shocking was a message thread from Caroline discussing her pregnancy announcement and baby registry. She had specifically selected expensive items for her registry because she knew I would choose something from the higher price range, and she had coordinated with my mother to ensure that my gift would be something Caroline actually wanted rather than something she would need to return or exchange later. The screenshots also revealed discussions about my professional success that were laced with resentment and minimization. Caroline had repeatedly characterized my career achievements as compensation for my personal failures, suggesting that my focus on work was a desperate attempt to create meaning in a life that lacked the real fulfillment that came from marriage and children. Tyler's decision to share these screenshots was motivated by his own anger about his parents' financial crisis and his fear that he would lose his college funding and other privileges if their situation did not improve quickly. His betrayal of his mother's confidence demonstrated that the family loyalty they had always preached was only strong when everyone's interests were aligned, and it dissolved immediately when personal consequences became serious enough to override abstract principles. Armed with this comprehensive documentation of their true feelings and manipulative strategies, I realized that my family's relationships were even more toxic and exploitative than Tyler's original confession had suggested. They had not just been taking advantage of my generosity, they had been actively deceiving me about their feelings, coordinating their manipulation efforts, and discussing my personal life with a level of contempt and condescension that revealed how little they had ever actually cared about my well-being or happiness. The final confirmation of their priorities came when Caroline called me directly, abandoning all pretense of sisterly affection and making explicit threats about the consequences I would face if I did not reconsider my decision to withdraw financial support. She informed me that my parents could lose their house if they had to cover Caroline's mortgage payments, and that Tyler and Emma would have to transfer to public schools if the family could not maintain their current financial arrangements. Caroline's threats were designed to make me feel responsible for the entire family's financial collapse, but they actually provided me with the perfect opportunity to demonstrate how thoroughly I had changed and how completely I was prepared to prioritize my own well-being over their manipulative demands. 6 months later, I was sitting in my newly redecorated living room, hosting a dinner party for the colleagues and friends who had become my chosen family, when I received the text message that would provide the final chapter to my family revenge story. Tyler had graduated high school and was preparing to start college on a partial academic scholarship that he had earned entirely through his own merit, and he wanted to apologize for his role in the family's financial manipulation and thank me for inadvertently teaching him valuable lessons about independence and self-respect. His message explained that the aftermath of my email had forced his family to confront their financial irresponsibility and make the dramatic lifestyle changes they should have implemented years earlier. Caroline had returned to work as a medical office receptionist, Marcus had found a second job delivering food on weekends, and they had downsized from their overpriced house to a modest apartment that actually fit their realistic budget. More importantly, Tyler had witnessed firsthand how quickly family relationships deteriorated when financial support disappeared, and the experience had motivated him to focus on developing skills and independence rather than expecting others to subsidize his lifestyle choices. He had gotten a part-time job, started contributing to his own college expenses, and gained a much clearer understanding of how manipulation and entitlement had damaged his family's relationships. My parents had also been forced to confront the consequences of their role in enabling Caroline's financial irresponsibility. When Caroline could no longer make her mortgage payments, they had discovered that their own retirement savings were insufficient to cover the debt they had co-signed, and they were facing the possibility of losing their house or working well beyond their planned retirement age. The financial crisis had exposed years of poor decision-making and wishful thinking that extended far beyond their relationship with me. They had been living beyond their means as well, using credit and loans to maintain a lifestyle that looked prosperous, but was actually built on debt and family subsidies that were never sustainable long-term. But the most satisfying update came from Jessica, who had remained in contact with several mutual acquaintances from our hometown. According to her sources, Caroline's marriage was struggling under the pressure of their financial difficulties and the reality of having to live within their actual means for the first time in years. Marcus had apparently expressed resentment about having to work 2 jobs, while Caroline complained about the demands of returning to the workforce after 14 years of comfortable domesticity. The entitled attitude that had made Caroline so confident about exploiting my generosity was not serving her well in the real world, where employers expected actual work performance rather than charming manipulation tactics. She had been disciplined several times for attendance issues and attitude problems, and her supervisors were reportedly unimpressed with her belief that her domestic experience qualified her for positions that required current professional skills. Meanwhile, my life had transformed in ways that I could never have imagined when I was trapped in the cycle of trying to buy love and acceptance from people who were fundamentally incapable of providing genuine affection. Without the constant drain of family obligations and financial manipulation, I had discovered aspects of my personality that had been suppressed for decades. I had been promoted to senior marketing director with a substantial salary increase that I was using to build my own financial security rather than subsidizing other people's lifestyle choices. I had joined a hiking club, started taking art classes, and developed genuine friendships with people who appreciated my personality rather than my bank account. Most importantly, I had learned to recognize the difference between authentic relationships and transactional arrangements disguised as family loyalty. The colleagues who had become my dinner party guests were people who had supported me through the difficult process of setting boundaries with my biological family, celebrating my successes without expecting financial rewards, and offering emotional support without ulterior motives. My chosen family included Maria, a fellow marketing professional who had become my closest confidant and adventure partner for weekend trips and cultural events. David, a graphic designer whose sense of humor and loyalty had helped me rediscover my own capacity for joy and spontaneity. Sarah, a financial advisor who had helped me restructure my savings and investments to prioritize my own long-term security. And James, a recently divorced father of two who understood the importance of surrounding yourself with people who appreciate your authentic self rather than tolerating a performance version. These relationships were based on mutual respect, shared interests, and genuine affection that did not require constant proof through expensive gestures or financial contributions. My chosen family celebrated my achievements, supported me through challenges, and created the kind of emotional safety that I had spent 34 years trying unsuccessfully to purchase from my biological relatives. The final vindication came when I learned through Tyler's messages that several extended family members had reached out to him privately, expressing regret about their participation in the pressure campaign and acknowledging that my documentation had opened their eyes to manipulation tactics they had previously overlooked or rationalized. My Aunt Patricia had apparently told Tyler that she felt ashamed about calling to pressure me into helping Caroline, especially after reading my detailed explanation of how my family had been exploiting my generosity for years. She had realized that her own interactions with me had been influenced by assumptions about my role and obligations that were unfair and inappropriate. The recognition from family members who had initially criticized my response provided validation that my analysis had been accurate and my boundaries had been necessary. People who had accused me of being selfish or vindictive eventually acknowledged that I had been subjected to systematic manipulation that justified my decision to protect myself from further exploitation. Now, as I finish telling you this story, I want to ask you something important. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where family members expected financial support that felt more like obligation than genuine requests for help? Have you experienced the painful discovery that relationships you thought were based on love were actually dependent on what you could provide rather than who you are as a person? When family loyalty becomes a weapon used to manipulate your generosity, how do you find the courage to prioritize your own well-being over expectations that have been established over decades? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below, because I have learned that recognizing these patterns is the first step toward building healthier relationships. If my story resonated with you, please give this video a like to help other people find it who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Subscribe to my channel for more stories about setting boundaries, building chosen families, and discovering that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable behavior that hurts everyone involved. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial transactions. Thank you for listening to my family revenge story, and I hope it encourages you to surround yourself with people who celebrate your authentic self rather than tolerating a performance version. Remember that real love does not require purchase prices, and genuine family relationships survive without constant financial proof of affection.